Lord, I call to you, hasten to me, listen to my plea when I call. Let my prayer be incense before you, my uplifting hands on evening offering.
You're tuned into Holy Smokes, Cigars, Catholicism, and Conversation. Let my prayer arise in thy sight as incense. I'm your host, Dustin Quick. This is episode 128, Vita Ordinaria, or Ordinary Holiness, with Matthew Allen Johnson from Is Ministries. Before we jump into tonight's episode, guys, just a word about my sponsor, Havana Palace on Huron Church Road, Windsor, Ontario, for the best service and finest cigars. Go see Caesar and Eli. They treat all their customers like family. If you would be so kind as to go to facebook.com/Havana Palace, give their page a like, I would greatly appreciate that, and so would they. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have with me Matthew Johnson. He is Ministries, returning guest. How are you this evening, my brother?
I am excellent, as always. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic, brother. I'm good. Happy to be alive and blessed and healthy and in the Catholic faith by the grace of God. So I'm
Amen.
good. So Matthew is a returning guest. Your apostolate has gone through a couple different name changes. Most recently, it's He Is Ministries. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your apostolate? What are you kind of doing with social media? How's that kind of going together right now?
So the irony now is it was originally Catholics on Record, and then it went to something else. And then I decided I wanted to fight the Arian crisis that I first saw. So He is, Jesus is God. He is God. So that's where I came up with the name He Is Ministries. And then suddenly it's turned into an interview program. So originally Catholics on Record was meant to be for interviews, never took off. And now
Right.
He Is Ministries is an interview program, which is what I intended to do originally. So it's kind of ironic how God works.
So it's coming full circle for you. That's great.
Full circle.
And I mentioned, I saw on Facebook a while back, there was an interview with William Albrecht. Did that end up panning out?
Never heard back from him.
Okay.
I never heard back from him. But we had a great interview with Lacey, from a friend of mine from Facebook. I don't know if you saw the interview. She was a former witch. And
Yeah. I didn't have a chance to catch it, but definitely going to have to go back and do that. Former witch.
Yeah, no, it's rare. The interview is very rare because she's in the process of becoming Catholic. She's not Catholic yet.
Oh, okay. Did she
It's
have
very
like
rare.
a Christian background as well somewhere in there, or
No, pure.
straight
You just
witch?
have to watch the video. It's amazing. It's
Wow.
not no Christian.
Well, thanks for telling me, brother. We're going to have to go back and check that out. Make sure you guys check that out. Where can we find you on YouTube? Like, just type in He Is Ministries.
Yeah, you should be able to. The hashtag at He Is Ministries.
Perfect. Well, make sure you guys go and do that story testimony with Lacey, former witch. Definitely want to check that out now. Thanks for reminding me and telling us about it, Matthew. So tonight we have as a subject Vita Ordinaria, or Ordinary Holiness. Why don't you describe for us what that is? What does that concept mean?
So, as far as I know, Vita Ordinaria means actually translates to ordinary life. And in our ordinary life, we're going to have moments in our life where we're going to be bored, sometimes bored to tears. We're going to be bored in this valley of tears. But then every moment is a chance for grace, as some saint said that every moment, everything is grace. So every chance we can live to be holy, even in the boring, mundane to tears moments, we should strive to live that ordinary holiness. It's kind of like a paradoxical statement. It's not like holiness is not ordinary, but in our ordinary life, we live for holiness.
Right. Yeah, that's everything is grace. I think that was Saint Therese.
Yeah. Prime example.
Yeah. And I mean, that goes back to the universal call to holiness for Catholics, right? You don't have to do great or momentous things for something to count. All you have to do is do small things with great love. That is Saint Teresa's little way. And she
Yeah.
would say things like, picking up a pin with the right intention off the floor can save a soul.
Mhm.
And we've talked about this before, how when your intentions, when your acts, when your prayers are united to the cross of Christ, Christ can then take those offerings and pour them out as grace and abundance to people who might need them. We might know them, we might not. They may be our next door neighbor, they might be somebody on a different continent, but that's the mystery of redemptive suffering and sacrifice within the body of Christ. And that's part of ordinary holiness, is taking our everyday mundane lives and activities and vocations and having them redeemed and transformed and glorified to do something magnificent. And to me, that's what when I think of a saint, that's what a saint exemplifies to me. Not necessarily heroic acts of virtue and martyrdom, although that certainly can and has been the case and is the case. But for many of us, we just live ordinary lives. And people might think, oh, holiness is reserved to monks or nuns or priests. But what am I going to do? I'm just a husband. I'm just a father. I'm just a student, a single person. And that's the beauty of the Catholic faith, is we're priests. We share in Christ's priesthood, priest, prophet, and king. And we could take all of our life as a spiritual sacrifice and offering, put it on the altar, and then watch it be transformed. And ultimately, souls can be saved through that. So that's what I would say.
Mhm.
I think that's really important. And now you've developed, I have here 7 rules of the Vita Ordinaria, and you did like kind of a 7-point rule of life or guide to how we can live out our vocation. So why don't we talk about those?
Okay. So we'll start. I got to pull up on my screen right here so I don't have to forget.
Yeah.
So the first point is sanctification in the ordinary, which is I want to start out with that. First of all, the seven's a perfect number, as we know. So I had to figure out something numerically, biblically there. So 7 would be the perfect number, perfection. So
Yeah, I didn't think the 7 was random either. I thought,
yeah,
you had something in mind there.
a
The
little
number
Easter
of
egg,
perfection. Yeah.
a little Easter egg. So sanctification in the ordinary. It says here we are to find sanctification even in the mundane and seemingly boring parts of life. So I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. That even in the mundane and boring parts of life, we are to find sanctification very actively. You could passively find it, and that's okay. But actively, God wants us to actively find Him and search Him out, like He searched out. So in the garden, when our first parents fell, he's like, "Where are you?" And that's an active search for us. So if He's doing that for us, we should do that for Him. Search Him out. Where are you, God?
Yeah. Where are you
Yeah.
right now? Like, and how can we do that? How can we seek God out in the ordinary? Like, do you have any sort of tips for doing that? Like, how does somebody get started? How do we get in that mind frame? How do we kindle that desire?
Well, I'll say first and foremost, if you got to first, like, if you're aware of something like that, you're aware that I want to do this. That's a grace in itself, because God has
Right.
made you aware. God has in our faith, we believe that God gives us the grace first, and we respond to it next. And it's kind of a back and forth cycle, back and forth. But first is grace. We don't do anything to merit grace. Grace comes to us,
Right.
and so we were responding to that grace, and then we stop and take a step back, and we're like, God is talking to me. What do you want me to do, God? Or what do you want to say to me? And then we let God speak, tug at our heartstrings, maybe audibly speak to us, visually show us something. And then we rest in Him. That's what it really means, is the sanctification in the ordinary is a rest, because that's what we're all called. Everybody's called to rest. See, that is one of the universal calls, is to rest. And not just laying around being lazy. It's just resting in His arms, resting in His peace, is
Right.
resting in prayer mainly.
So would you say, like, first of all, like, if you're kind of to take a roadmap, the first step is acknowledging, like, the fact that you even have this desire. You're
Mm-hmm.
already on the path. You're already getting started, because that's
Yeah.
already a grace being shown to you, and you're responding. So it's grace
Mhm.
upon grace.
Yeah.
right? Next, you would probably want to sort of frame it in the context of your life in terms of your vocation. So
Yeah.
we're talking about ordinary life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you would just look at your vocation and start there. Like if I'm married, okay,
Mm-hmm.
not everyone can relate to that, but a lot of people can. I'm married and I have kids, for example. So how do I seek out holiness within that vocation? And you would start to ask those questions. Maybe put even a plan together. You know, it sounds corny, but honestly, writing these things down
Mm-hmm.
is really helpful, because
Yeah.
if you have a physical plan, you can look at it, you can attack it, you can check stuff off, and you could feel more motivated. I know that's the case with me. It's easy to get stuff in my head
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, kind of refer back to it now and again, but I'll forget, I'll get lazy, I'll get distracted. But if I write something down and force myself to do it, then I can check it off and be like, okay, this is where I am right now, this is how I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get a lot more progress made. And I don't think, you know, we do that with like to-do lists and chores and stuff like that, but why should the spiritual life be any different? If it's incarnational, then we should apply the same principle. Like, make a roadmap, make a plan. Okay, this
Yeah.
is my vocation, right? So what are some things I can do to seek God in the ordinary? Like when I'm actively aware of this, and okay, this is what God wants me to do. He wants me to sanctify this station in life. So what would be next? What would be some like practical tips if you're, for example, married and you're looking, okay, how do I bring holiness into the ordinary? What are some things that we can do?
So in any of these steps, you have to respond to the grace. You have to realize that grace is part of your life, like you said, and respond to it. Then you have to look at your surroundings. Like you kind of take a step back and look at your surroundings. And and God will show you. Like if you're married, most likely God's going to show you your wife or for the wife, the husband, or your spouse or your kids. If you have kids, God willing, He'll show you that, and you'll get this. You might at first, if you're not in the dark night, you might get this overwhelming consolation. I'm sure we've all had that. I remember one time I was doing something with karate. That was my vocation at the time. I got this overwhelming surge, and I think that was like a taste of what I have now is like this overwhelming surge of grace, like grace upon grace. It's just this overwhelming feeling, like I'm in the moment. I'm excited. I'm alive, and
Yeah.
like God is with me. And like you feel happy. It's really a happy, joyful feeling, and you feel this anywhere. And you see this around. You see, like for me, I see my wife and my two kids. I might feel this overwhelming joy. I reach out and go to them and say, "How can I help you?" For example,
Right.
like a little service. You respond with service, and that's where grace builds upon grace upon grace.
Yeah. So like looking for acts of service, ways to be
Mhm.
sacrificial,
Yes.
ways to be loving, to kind of go out of your way, step out of your comfort zone.
Hmm.
Even I know something so simple as like, you know, getting your wife some flowers when she's not expecting it, or just something small, like a small gesture like that. It could go a long way. Making sure you give her a kiss before you leave to work or you
Yeah.
go out somewhere, just something like that. And it's really a beautiful thing. You know, matrimony is a sacrament, so we can bring, and we should bring, holiness into that union wherever and however we can.
Yeah.
Uh, what about, and this kind of touches on the first one, sanctification in the ordinary, God's will for our vocation. So what about this one? Tell us about this, number two.
So this may be a bit controversial, but this is something I've found personally helps me. So you can take it for what you will. This is kind of like one of those not optional, but I would highly suggest using it. It says here, we are not to seek positions of power or titles unless God's will would be done in the matter. So I found that if I try and like seek to go ahead in a job or a career, like I want to be the boss right now, I'm going to fail every time. So start out like seeking. I want to seek the lowest. Like it reminds me of what Saint Joseph did. I can imagine Saint Joseph saying, "Okay, what do you want me to do? I'll do the lowest job possible, the entry level job, and then if I won't ask for any promotion, any title. If you want me to do it, okay, I must respond with a yes, with my fiat." And there's where Mary comes in, the fiat. So this deals mainly with careers and stuff at this point. But if you like, let's say for example, you don't have a job, you're disabled, you're on
Right.
disability. So every little thing that you're doing in your life at that moment is you want to seek out God there.
Right. So, I mean, to me, this really speaks to humility,
Mhm.
right? Not seeking our wealth or not that there's anything wrong with wealth in and of itself, depending on, how we use it. Of course, it's neutral, but not seeking out vainglory and titles, positions of power, like you said, but actually looking, and not in the sense of like, like a martyr complex, but really lowering yourself and abasing yourself, never thinking you're above something or somebody, and actually stooping down to see what you can do where you're at.
Mhm.
Maybe you don't have to take a step up. Maybe you have to take a step down. Maybe you have to serve in a different way, and you have to abase yourself and humble yourself, because then you'll be exalted in the long run and your reward will be great in heaven.
Mhm.
That's the way, humility and
Yeah.
obedience. Maybe you have a job and you don't get along with your boss, and you just have a sort of a mundane routine that you go through day in and day out. You walk in, I hate my job, I don't like my boss, I hate working in this environment, it's toxic, whatever. Well, what if you went to your job and you're like, you know what, this is how I feel, I'm going to put my feelings aside, I'm going to work as if God is watching me, and he is,
Mhm.
and I want to do this for his glory. So I'm going to work hard. I'm going to go out of my way to be kind to my coworkers, be kind to my boss. Maybe if he has a hard heart toward me, that could be a way of showing him the gospel, right? Is by humbling yourself, being kind, being loving, and maybe asking your boss, like, hey, I'm really grateful to work here. I'm grateful for this opportunity. If there's anything that I can do, above and beyond my daily duties or whatever, if you want me to step up and do something, just let me know. I'd love to help.
Mhm.
And honestly, that can soften the hardest heart, and it could shock a lot of people. And to me, if you're living the gospel and preaching the gospel, it's things like that really can have an impact. Not to say that preaching can't, and obviously it does, right? Words are important, but when you go out of your way, especially in uncomfortable situations, to humble yourself for the benefit and betterment of somebody else and your relationship with them, that could go a heck of a long way. And that could transform the way that you go to your job, the way that you work, and it could change your whole scenario there, your whole scenery, and it could be divinized, glorified.
Mhm.
So, number 3, we have prayer and fasting. Self-explanatory, right? But I think, again, it goes back to, if you want to pray consistently, you have to start small, but be consistent, right?
Yeah.
Like, build a foundation, build a rule of prayer. So, like, how would you recommend somebody go about implementing like a regular prayer rule in their life? And how would they go about fasting, especially if, they've never done it before, or it's new to them, whatever?
So the Orthodox are really good about starting a person down. I give credit to the Orthodox, but in the Eastern community for starting people out small. When I had an Orthodox spiritual director, I wanted to be as zealous. I was coming in there zealous. I was excited. Oh, Orthodoxy, bam, bam. We've talked about the whole Orthodox period of my life before. Very exciting time. But he's like, okay, just take a step back. He's a very wise priest. So take a step back. I want you to say the Jesus prayer 30 times a day. That's it. Just Jesus prayer.
Yeah.
Do nothing else. And I was like, I do what? Because I'm not used. I wasn't
Right.
used to it at the time. So
Right.
just do Jesus prayer. And if you feel, and this was the key, and if you feel compelled to do more, pray about it. Think about it.
Right.
But you
Right.
must do that. You must do in obedience this amount of prayers. But if you feel a strong compulsion to do it, discern. I think that's wise. That's with fasting too. You want to start small, but you also want to have a spiritual director, some spiritual guide to be able to. We see this in the saints' lives a lot. They had spiritual guides and spiritual directors to be able to say, "Look, you need to pray and fast this certain way, and you need to put all of yourself into that prayer life because God is putting all of Himself into your life."
Right. And so, and I think that's lost on a lot of people too, is it can be overwhelming because you have this idea in your head. Okay, I want a strong prayer life. I want to do spiritual practices. I need the discipline. I want to grow in union with God, which are all great and admirable things and things that we're all striving for. But I think a lot of people, especially in, the apostolic churches, and in our case, the Latin church, there's a lot of devotions, a lot of rules of prayer and disciplines, right? So you could take a step back and look at the whole sort of landscape and might get overwhelmed. Like, how do I know what's right for me? Like, there's so much to choose from. What if I take on too much and get overwhelmed?
Yeah.
That could be a problem, because then you're going to run into spiritual burnout, and that's happened to a lot of people, myself included, right? So what I would suggest is, and you brought up a great point, you're not an island unto yourself. You're not alone in this, right? So you might want to find a spiritual director first and foremost. And if you can't right away, while you're discerning, who should take you on, you can always go to a trusted priest that's your confessor and talk to your confessor and just ask for advice. Like, Father, I'm looking to establish a regular prayer life. What are some things that I can do? And if the priest, it's better even if the priest knows you well, then he can sort of tailor the rule of prayer to your personality, to your state in life, etc., and so on. So then put your hands in the hands of a wise spiritual mentor, spiritual father.
Yeah.
And don't just trust yourself and your own wisdom, thinking, well, I'm going to figure this all out on my own.
Yeah.
The beauty about being Catholic is we don't have to, and we're not encouraged to, right? We're encouraged to stick together as the body of Christ and band together and build one another up and nourish each other. And so if we're looking to establish a spiritual discipline, I would say, reach out to a spiritual director, like you said. And if that's not possible right at this time, then at least maybe a regular priest that you go to for confession that kind of knows you, fairly well, if possible, and ask them for advice. Hey, what can I do to establish a regular prayer rule, a prayer life? And for me, like, and a lot of people obviously can relate to this, is the rosary. And like I said in a previous episode that I did on the rosary just a couple weeks ago, was, it can be daunting, especially if you're not used to praying it regularly. I mean, it takes a good 20 minutes, half an hour. But you might have that desire, like, I really want to pray the rosary, but I don't know how I'm going to possibly find time every day to do that.
Yeah.
Well, right, you got to start small. Pray a decade. It takes maybe 3 weeks to a month to establish the habit, the experts say, right? So if you're starting out, you don't want to, again, take on too much and burn out. So I would say pray a decade of the rosary for maybe 3 weeks to a month. If you're ready after that, you have that foundation, then add another one. Pray 2. Do that for a month. Then add 3. Before you know it, you'll be at 5. And, it's hard, I know, to take time out of your day to find time to pray and to center yourself and kind of drown out the distractions. I realize that's tough, especially if we have busy lives and, our vocation does demand a lot of us. But, just try to find time of peace and quiet, even if it's 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. It doesn't have to be a long time at any one time. Like for me, I pray the rosary to and from work when I'm in my car. I put the scriptural rosary app on and pray along with it. And I get a good 40 minutes of prayer each day just from doing that. So, we can always find time. We just have to seek and discern, pray, and again, ask the guidance of a good spiritual director or confessor to help us on our way. I think that can go really far. And fasting as well. I mean, tell us a bit about fasting. Like, how have you implemented that in your life?
Not very well sometimes, most of the time, honestly. I'm gonna be quite honest. I try. I'll fast from if I'm thinking if I wake up in the middle of the night, I've noticed this. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm having trouble with my health and all that, because I have sleep apnea very bad and insomnia and all that good stuff. So I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm having an episode where I'm starting to feel like I don't know, for example, I feel like I've had this before, choking, like I can't breathe. I used to like be in despair because I'm like, oh crap, I feel like I'm dying. And like, you know, if you're choked and feel like you're choking, you do feel like you're dying. So I prayed about it. I was like, well, I can apply this to the spiritual life. So if I'm waking up and I feel like I need to immediately switch from my mindset, take the negative thought out, put the positive thought in that, oh, wait, I can offer this up for somebody who's like having lung complications, like our
Right,
precious
exactly.
Holy Father. So like for the past few nights, if I'm having that episode, which I have, I offer it up for the Holy Father because he's not doing so well.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think, when we think of fasting, we automatically jump to, oh, I got to give up this or give up that, or I got to go this long without eating or drinking, and
yeah.
I get tired, I get cranky, and then you're off your game before you know it. And to me, if that's the spirit in which you're doing fasting, you're already setting yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Pope Francis, one of the things he often says when it comes time for Lent is, what can we give up? Well, why don't we abstain from gossip, from slander, from cursing? So I think that's what we need to firstly focus on, is curtailing vice, fasting from vice, and replacing those with virtues. That will make the exterior practice of fasting that much more natural, and it'll flow from the mind and heart, rather than you're just trying to impose this external practice on yourself. And your heart not might be in it. So I would say try to fast from, if you have a bad habit of like swearing or gossiping, try to just set a goal for yourself. Say the next 30 days I'm going to pay extra attention to gossiping, and I'm going to really try to weed it out. I'm going to be vigilant, and I'm going to just put it to death as best I can with God's help.
Mm-hmm.
Do that for 30 days. Try these with all the different vices and virtues. Kind of build that spiritual foundation. And then as you're doing this, you can apply, because we're incarnational beings, right? Body and soul. So we can also apply external things as we're working on fasting from vice. We can also pick something, or however many things you feel called to do as a sacrifice, to give those things up. But the great thing is with being Catholic, again, is that redemptive aspect, is when we fast or we make sacrifice, it's not just we who are benefiting. Of course, God doesn't benefit because he has no need of anybody or anything. He's perfectly blessed within himself. But when we fast, we offer those intentions up, that could be somebody's healing, that could be their physical healing, that could be spiritual liberation, that could be getting a soul out of purgatory by the grace of God. So I would say work on building a sort of, I don't know, like a cachet of like intentions. Like maybe write these down. Like, what can I offer fast for? What can I offer sacrifices for? And just write out different intentions.
Yeah.
Before you know it, like you could think of so many things, so many people in your life that that need help. You could probably write a book, in no short amount of time. Just write down, who can I offer this for? Just start writing people down, and you will have no shortage of things to fast for. And that gives you extra motivation too, right? Because it's not like, oh, I just have to give something up, and that can kind of make you, put you in a kind of a dismal mood, a despondent mood, like, oh, I have to sacrifice this and I love it. But if you're doing it with the intention of, I'm sacrificing this for my grandma who has cancer, and you're confident that through your sacrifice united to Christ, he can bring that grace and bring that healing through you for his glory and for the salvation of your grandmother, for her physical and spiritual well-being and healing. So that gives you extra motivation when you fast to do it successfully. This will be the steam that kind of pushes you forward and pushes you through. So I think that would be a good way to look at fasting as well. Somebody says, Pathetic Hermetic says, I have found fasting a lot better at tackling vices than prayer. Prayer is good, but fasting really helps for me. Yeah. And, Jesus says, these demons don't come out except by prayer and fasting. He doesn't just say prayer. He includes fasting in there for a reason.
Yeah.
There's a lot of power in it, but I think it's downplayed a lot today. I really do. You don't hear about it too much. That's one thing that I have a lot of respect for the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Eastern Catholics, is they take fasting very, very seriously. Like right now, they're in a fast, I believe. So, or they're coming up on one for Lent, and it's like, basically vegetarian diet.
Yeah.
So again, you could look at it like, oh man, I have to give up all the stuff that I love. Well, yes, but you can offer that for somebody's salvation, somebody's healing. Souls can get out of purgatory through my sacrifice. So that gives you that extra motivation. So that was prayer and fasting. We also have almsgiving / works of charity. So how do we do this? I mean, coming from a Protestant background, for example, we're always, I don't want to say always, but often we're taught we have to tithe. We're not doing the right thing unless we're giving 10% to the church, right? Or giving 10% to God through the church. We're not offering our first fruits, our best, if we're not tithing, and it's mandatory. Well, from a Catholic perspective, like how do we approach almsgiving and works of charity, especially if a lot of us don't have a lot of money? We're on a budget or worse. So what are we supposed to do if we're strapped for cash? Like, how are we supposed to give alms and do acts of charity if we don't have a lot of money? You got any tips there?
Well, I would say Jesus tackled this when he was nearing the end of his time on earth. He talked to the Pharisees and the scribes. He said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, who tithe dill and mint." And I saw this on The Chosen, so that's why I know this line.
Yeah.
Who tithe dill and mint, but do not help others. And in this scene in The Chosen, he said, "Look around you. Who have you helped?" And they get mad, not because they're because of one reason or another, because they know they did wrong. They're just tithing for the letter of the law, which a lot of us do, myself included. But it's the spirit of the law that matters too. They weren't tithing because of the spirit of the law, like the widow did. The widow who gave the 2 cents of her entire being, or look for that lady who looked for the 1 coin with all of her being.
Right.
It's what we give on the inside that counts sometimes more than the outside. Yeah, I have my fancy suit. I'm giving my 10%. What about the homeless person who's giving his 10% with all he has? He won't be able to eat tonight. Who's more blessed?
Yeah, exactly. So don't look at almsgiving or works of charity in terms of a dollar amount. And I mean, that seems obvious, but it's easy to get into that trap, right? Well, as long as I put money in the collection basket, I'm good. I've done my duty. I've given alms. I've done an act of charity. That money is going to go where it needs to go, and the church will take care of that, so I can wash my hands and kind of walk away. Now, don't get me wrong. Giving to the church is wonderful. It is wonderful indeed. And, God will direct those funds appropriately. But there's also ways that we can help in our own sphere. We don't even have to spend money necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, helping somebody with a bag that's elderly crossing the street or something like this, again, offered up in union with Christ, can become an act of charity or giving alms. Helping somebody less fortunate doesn't have to be in terms of a dollar amount all the time.
Yeah.
Just give what you can, right? Oftentimes I hear the three T's, right? Time, talent, and treasure. So if you give of those things, you're, again, with the right spirit, you're giving alms, you're doing acts of charity. So you could think of it that way. Just give of yourself. If that includes money, or money's, a part of it, then, and you have the means to do that, and it's not putting a undue strain on you, then glory to God, go right ahead and do it. But there's also ways that you can give of yourself and of your time and of your talents that may or may not include finances. But that's not really what matters. What matters is giving of yourself, making yourself a living sacrifice, as St. Paul says in Romans 12. How can you do that? Just ask yourself, ask God, take it to him in prayer. Lord, how can I be a living sacrifice for someone else and give of myself? And you might be surprised at the results, right? We also have, this is an obvious one, but it's super, super important. The sacraments, right? Number 5.
Yes.
So how do we make the most of getting grace out of the sacraments?
Yeah. I would think this one would be the easiest and the most like explained one out of all that we talked about so far. The saints have explained this that we need to frequent the sacraments, the Eucharist, confession, anointing of the sick. So, Eucharist is our bread of life for our salvation, for our spiritual food. Confession helps heal our souls primarily, and helps us to learn to forgive as well as be forgiven. And anointing of the sick is strengthening for the journey. If you have mental illness or you have physical ailments or any kind of ailment, you can go to receive anointing of the sick. So the key is a frequent one devotion. It's kind of like goes along with the fourth one we talked about, alms giving, works of charity.
Mm-hmm.
You want to frequent that devotion on the inside rather than, I'm just going to receive the Eucharist because I have to, because mom and dad want me to receive communion, or I'm going there to show myself so that no one knows that I'm sinning. Whatever excuse you want to have, or I'm going to confession. Even confession, we can frequent confession. Like I'm going to go once a week because, they're seeing me go to confession, and no one will know that I'm in this doing this, that, and the other, in this kind of sense. So we can frequent the sacraments, but do we frequent devotion? That's the key. Devotion's key.
Yeah, devotion and frequency, right? I think if we tie those two things together, we'll have a recipe for success.
Yes.
I mean, it's great if you're able to go to daily mass during the week. That's fantastic. I know a lot of us can't, but if you can and you have the means to do that and you have the time, frequent reception of Holy Communion will bring a heck of a lot of graces, and we already know that, but it's worth repeating. If we can segment our week with the Eucharist, just imagine how much better off we'd be. All those graces we can avail ourselves to, especially if we're having a difficult week. Interspersing it with Holy Mass could make all the difference and give us the grace we need to not only drudge through that week, but get through it, on eagle's wings, so to say. And confession, I know a lot of people might be averse to going frequently. I get it, especially if it's the same sin you keep committing and you go to the same priest, and you might think, oh, I'm just going to confess the same thing and he's going to judge me and I feel embarrassed, or I don't want to do this. It could be easy to fall into that trap too with frequent confession. You might get discouraged, right? But the more you go, and I've heard this from quite a few people, priests, that confession is more powerful than an exorcism.
Yeah.
So, right, if you have sins that are weighing you down, keep getting up and going. Don't give up, because the more you do that, you're going to develop that habit of being open to receiving graces, and you'll be able to break those chains that bind you. No matter how many times you fall, a wise man falls 7 times, right? Keep going, getting back up, going to the confessional, and don't wait. Don't wait and say, oh, I'm only going to go when I commit a mortal sin, because it's easy to fall into the trap of like, oh, this isn't mortal, so it doesn't matter. Well, if we have that attitude towards sin, even small, minor, venial sins, that eventually is going to build a crust on our heart, make us hard toward the grace of God, and eventually we'll fall into mortal sins, into bigger sins. So even if you're not conscious of mortal sin and you're able to go to confession frequently, I think Pope St. John Paul the Great went maybe once a week or more.
Yeah.
So if you're able to do that, just like to build that regimen, that spirit, building those spiritual muscles, that's a great thing to do. And you'll find that you'll have a lot more self-mastery, and advancing in the spiritual life will be that much easier. So I think confession and communion definitely go together. And if you can frequent those things more often, the better off you'll be. And here you have Matthew number 6, Marian devotion. So why is Marian devotion so important for building a rule of life?
it's not so much the Marian devotion exactly, but it's like having a particular Marian devotion. That's what I meant to say. Like if your Marian devotion is like the brown scapular, live that well. Live
Right.
what comes about it. But if your devotion is the rosary, live that too. You want to live it with 100% effort. Not just saying, "Oh, I'm gonna wear the brown scapular. I'm not going to hell." No, well, you might do something that might lead you that way, and you're still wearing the brown scapular. I pray the rosary 7 times a day. I'm like Padre Pio. No, you got to have devotion. You got to have a frequency. You have to like you said, frequency and devotion. Um, yeah, those are some things. And it's like I said here, the capacity God wills for us in the present moment. So if you feel like at the start of your prayer life, oh, I want to pray rosary right now, do it. Don't ignore that call. It's like one priest told me. He said it's like if you feel like it's oversurging love of God and you ignore it, it's like ignoring like winning the lottery and be like, I'm gonna play next time and I'll get it next time. He wins a
Right.
multi-million-dollar prize. I'll let somebody else have it. It's like you get this great prize, you throw it away.
Yeah. If you feel that call, and that's grace knocking at your door, don't
Mm-hmm.
ignore it. Capitalize on the situation, right? So yeah, particular Marian devotion is important. I mean, I've done a lot of episodes on the Blessed Mother and the Rosary and different things like that. Mary is indispensable in the economy of salvation in terms of, she's the one that said yes to the incarnation. She brought Christ into the world. So therefore, she's a principal means by which we come to Christ. She brought the world to Christ. She brought Christ to the world. She brings the world to Christ. She could take you by the hand and lead you to her son more intimately.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the importance of having a particular Marian devotion. It's one thing to say, yeah, I'm devoted to the Blessed Mother, but to be able to express that in a concrete way and make that part of your life, like consciously a part of your life, you're going to get closer to Jesus Christ no matter what. It's never just about her. She always leads to Christ. I think I forget. I think it was Saint Alphonsus the Gory or Saint Louis de Montfort. One of the two says, when Mary breathes, it makes one sound, and that sound is God. So she just do whatever he tells you. That's her mission in life, and the spiritual life, to bring us to Christ. So to be able to express that in concrete ways, like through the Rosary, through living out the brown scapular, through praying the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, things like this, make it concrete. The great thing about being enrolled in the brown scapular is you're pretty much bound to either, like a particular Marian devotion. So that's a great way to get in that mindset of like making that part of your life. Enroll in the brown scapular, then by extension, you will have a particular Marian devotion that you're kind of bound to. You're yoked to. So for some people, it's the Rosary. For some people, it's the little office, the Mary's office, and whatever else you can think of. So I think that's a great practice, because the more you devote yourself to Our Lady, the more she'll point you and direct you and guide you by the hand to her Son, Jesus Christ. And lastly, we have the present now. We are to realize where God is, which is the present and in the now.
So I guess you could say that present and now are kind of the same thing, but I wanted to doubly push the mindset that he is here, he is with us now and forever, not in the past. He's not a God of the past, not a God of the future. He forgives your sins. He doesn't hold on to grudges. He's the God of the now. He loves you now. So this is where all this 1 through 6 tied to number 7. So if you don't understand 1 through 6, understand number 7. He is with you now, and he is with you at this moment. He's with us right now, not in some like phantasm, like spooky way, but he is with us in a very intimate. He courses through our veins, especially when we receive Eucharist and sacraments. His sanctifying life, we become partakers of the divine nature, theosis, and deifications, and all that. So when we do that, this theosis, he partakes in our life, and we partake in his.
Right.
Very intimate communion. There's a reason why the Trinity is a communion. It's not for his benefit, but for us. He revealed himself as in a communion to help us benefit finding him.
Right.
Him being in the Trinity was not for himself, but for us. If you think
Right.
about it.
Yeah, we're to mirror that, right? God is
Yeah.
love, and we know that because God is a communion of persons, and what is between them and their nature is love, and we are to mirror that. We're to image that, right? So not only our communion with God, but our communion with each other. And that's the thing too. Like, we're talking about ordinary holiness or being holy in our ordinary life. It's easy to put off that call. It's you can easily say, well, I'm just gonna I'll pray tomorrow, I'll start reading the Bible tomorrow, I'll go to confession next month, or you can do any number of things. You could just keep putting them off. But you got to stop and ask yourself, because if you keep putting that off until tomorrow's never going to come. But if you take a step back and you say, okay, God, kind of circle back to where we were in the beginning, right? Look at
Mhm.
your state in life. What's my vocation? What responsibilities do I have? Take it to the Lord in prayer. Lord, what are you asking me to do? What do you want me to do to get the most out of my life right now? What can I do to give you the most of myself? And what can I do to give the most of myself to others? What can I do now? What can I do with the state of life that I'm in now? And don't look to the future, what you're going to do in the future. It's okay to plan and be reasonable, but what can I do now? And if you feel that calling and that grace, don't put it off. Another thing too is, again, we talked about spiritual direction and spiritual fatherhood.
Mhm.
It's not always, you know, asking the Lord, what can I do? And expecting to hear an audible voice answer back.
Mhm.
It's, what can I do? Lord, direct me to the right person or people that can help me organize my life. So that, what can I do? Maybe you're going to take that to your spiritual director or spiritual father, confessor, and say, Father, I want to live holy. I'm married, I have children, or I'm single, or whatever. What can I do to sanctify my life right now? Ask for advice, ask for counsel, wise counsel. And through that synergy of God's grace working through that priest or that trusted friend or whatever, you might be able to come up with something amazing that you could never have thought of on your own, and it might be right there in front of your face.
Yeah.
So those are some ways that you can kind of discern, okay, Lord, what are you calling me to do now? And don't put it off.
Mhm.
Start acting now, even if you don't. And that's the thing, right? We always think we have to feel something before we do it. It's actually a better habit to know what is right and do it regardless of how you feel, and make that a habit. Then you really advance in holiness, right? I
Yeah.
think that's a recipe for success. Do what is right even when you don't feel like it. If you want to grow in ordinary holiness and ordinary life, do what's right even when you don't feel like it. And I think you'll really advance that way. Matthew,
Mhm.
did you have anything you wanted to close with, or have any parting words for us?
Um, I had a thought. A good 20-minute thought. There's a reason I was thinking, like, for a while. There's a reason why you're given a penance. It's not just to heal you and all that. That could be a temporary prayer rule. Like, say the Father says, "Do one Our Fathers and three Hail Marys," and then until the next time you see your priest, if you don't have a prayer rule, you can use that as a prayer rule because you've been assigned to do that. Who says you have to
Your
stop doing
penance, yeah.
it? Like, oh, I can do that once. Well, do that again and again until you are assigned that, or you can add on to that every time. Keep a track of your penances, and like say, okay, this week he assigned one for Our Father and three Hail Marys for the virtue of charity. Now next week and I went to the same thing with the same thing, especially if it's the same sin that you're going through. You can
Right.
apply that same penance, and you get that snowball effect, and you'll get rid of that vice in no time if you keep on snowball affecting that penance.
I never thought about that. Taking your penance and making it a prayer rule. That's
Yeah.
really good, man. That's really, and penances are given too in the context of a particular confession. You might have confessed certain sins, and the priest is probably going to discern, okay, based off of his spiritual state or her spiritual state and the sins they've committed, I think this penance would be appropriate. So if you're struggling with a particular sin, to which that penance is especially geared. If you're struggling with that sin, maybe doing the penance in that moment where you're tempted or about to struggle, maybe that's what you need to break free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very good point, brother. I didn't even think of that. That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I wanted to thank you for tuning in tonight. Again, this isn't, I don't want to say like a huge, heady, it can be a huge, heady theological topic, but we wanted to take something, again, that is ordinary, per the title, make it applicable, make it relevant, because it's one thing to study theology and apologetics and all that, and that stuff is great. It has its place, but ultimately we're called to be holy, right? That's a call to each one of us as baptized Catholics. It's not just reserved to a certain class or group of people. It's for all of us. We're all called to be holy, no matter what our state in life is, whatever our vocation is. So how can we practically grow in holiness? What kind of tips, what kind of strategies can we employ? We do need strategies because we are at war, and our enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So how do we combat that? How do we have defensive and offensive strategies to wage the spiritual war? Because that's ultimately what we're doing. Until the Lord calls us home or he comes back, this is warfare, and we need to be prepared. So we need to have strategies. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about this evening. So thank you, Matthew, for coming on. I appreciate that. And I like that 7-point rule you have for Vita Ordinaria, ordinary holiness, ordinary life. Very good stuff, brother. Well, with that, guys, I just want to say you've been tuned into Holy Smoke, Cigars, Catholicism, and Conversation. Let my prayer arise in thy sight as incense. I'm your host, Dustin Quick. This was episode 128, Vita Ordinaria, or Ordinary Holiness, Ordinary Life, with Matthew Allen Johnson of Is Ministries. Make sure you guys go check him out on YouTube. And I'm going to end the broadcast right now. God bless, guys. Stay safe. And remember, be holy.